Hey everyone, my name is Sara Harberson. I'm America's college counselor. It's good to be back here. I want to make sure that all of you can hear and see me well and that I'm streaming live. I should be streaming live on both of my Facebook pages, Sara Harberson and Admissions Revolution. I always love hearing from all of you, and Facebook Live is really where it all got started. So I'm anxious to see what questions you all have for me about the admissions process. This is a busy time of year. If you know a high school senior, they are either they've just made a decision about where they're going to college or they're about to. May 1st is the big National College Decision Day, but we've got a lot of high school juniors who are gearing up for the college admissions process. And obviously freshmen and sophomores have so many questions. They want to do the right thing so that they are better prepared when they are a high school senior applying to college. I've got a lot of free resources on my website, saraharberson.com. You all know that I do a weekly blog. My weekly blog will be published tomorrow if you're interested. It's some last minute reminders for some high school seniors who are going to be reading it. I also have a lot of guides that you can access on saraharberson.com and a lot of videos that you can watch. And obviously, if you need more support, Application Nation and Application Nation class of 2023 are still accepting new families. So think about it if you're interested. All right, we are going to get started, I think, and try to answer some questions that all of you have. Always curious, where you all are coming from. Are you a parent? Are you a student? What year of high school you or your child is in? I always love hearing too. It's so cool to see such range in terms of age range and also geographic range. So let's get started with a question from Lisa. What do you recommend kids give to their teachers when asking for a recommendation? A resume, a brag sheet? Is an economics teacher a good choice if a student is interested in a business major? I would say let's answer the first question first. If a student is going to be applying to an undergraduate business program, you can absolutely ask a social science history teacher like an economics teacher. I would say that if it's an AP macro or AP microeconomics teacher, that's going to carry a little bit more weight. So usually the student is going to be listing a major on their application where that is the strongest subject matter that they have in high school, and usually that means taking a more advanced level class, whether it's an honors class, an AP class, or in some cases an IB class. So yes, I think an AP Econ teacher would be great for a letter of recommendation for a business student. The other question was, what should you bring along? I'm not a big fan of resumes because then the letter writer, the teacher, ends up using that as a crutch. What's interesting, and I've been on both sides of the process, writing letters of recommendation for students when I worked at a high school, but also reading literally hundreds of thousands of letters of recommendation when I worked on the college side. The letters of recommendation from teachers should not be going through your resume or mentioning all the activities or experiences that you've had outside the classroom. That is the responsibility of the student to report in the activity section. So admissions officers really want to hear about what that student is like in the classroom. Obviously, if that teacher has any interaction with the student outside of class, that is really helpful information. So if you're a member of Application Nation class of 2023, you will have access to all of my resources for what to do when you ask a teacher for a letter of recommendation. I have sample emails, sample checklists so that you know exactly what is important to share with that teacher. So if you're interested, Application Nation 2023, we just did a Zoom call on this. Hi, Marjorie. Aloha, Sara. Yes, this is one of our AN 2023 families. So good to see you. I don't know what time it is for you, Marjorie. You guys are so far behind in terms of hours in the day. I love that you still are so active with what we're doing here on the East Coast. You're asking about Lily, and she has a question. If a school scripts, I love scripts, states in the common data set they require 3 years of a language and she only has 2, should she even apply? Asking, are requirements actually different than recommendations? And if not, let immediate deny. It's a lottery school for her, and only early decision she'd do it if there's a chance of her getting admitted. So Marjorie's asking a good question. If you're not familiar with Scripps, it's an all-women's college in California. It's absolutely amazing. And she is referring to the Common Data Set. In Application Nation, I share the tips that and all the great information that's in a Common Data Set about a college. And it will list what they require on that Common Data Set for the admissions process. Sometimes a college will also list it on their website, on their admissions website. I think 2 years is kind of the bare minimum, Marjorie, but if a college says that they do require 3, that's going to be the expectation. Sometimes they do make exceptions for a student who is really, really special. So what's indicated on the Common Data Set, that's kind of their guide, and they like to follow that as much as possible. But sometimes they do make exceptions, and knowing Lily, you know, she is a really special young woman. I did see her draft of her SOUNDBITE already. It's looking really impressive already. And so you never know, she could have a shot. So I know we've looked at her senior schedule already, but it's something for us to continue to discuss. But I think sometimes colleges, if they really, really like a student, they will admit a student, even if they haven't met all of those requirements that are listed. All right, next question. What is the best approach if no counselor letter is required and only one teacher letter is permitted? This is Ohio State. Can the counselor letter be added under teacher or other? It depends. You know, a lot of the big public state universities, they are going to limit the number of letters of recommendation and sometimes even limit other pieces of the application. If they're not asking for a counselor letter of recommendation, I probably wouldn't submit it unless, even if it's in another form, unless there's something really unusual going on that the student feels is important that the counselor mentions. But ultimately, the student could also mention that. There's an additional information section on the Common App on almost every single application out there. So if there's something unusual, let's say there was a scheduling conflict and you weren't able to take a certain class that is very important, or something about your family background and your counselor is not able to write a letter of recommendation, I would make sure that it's at least included in the additional information section for that specific college. But the thing about Common App and Coalition App, once you submit an application, that's the exact application that college will receive. You can, after you submit that application to Ohio State, you can go back into Common App and actually delete that Common, especially if the other colleges on your list do require a counselor letter of recommendation. I'm not a big fan of using the additional information section, so you want to have a very good reason for it. And if those other colleges are getting, just want to make sure I'm not completely frozen. You okay? All right, I'll keep going and hopefully my video will catch up. You just, with Common App, you can make those changes and it won't change an application that's already been submitted, but it would change all the subsequent applications that you send after that. All right, next question. Hi, Sarah. My daughter is a competitive swimmer and now in junior year. She swims 20 plus hours each week with a local club and her high school varsity team. But she's not fast enough to be recruited to her dream D1 schools, and she does not want to swim Division III. Oh, that breaks my heart. My question is, should she quit swimming this summer and participate in some intended major related activities like research or interns? How do admissions officers view this kind of time-consuming sport activities? Do admissions officers put in context to view why she does not have much extracurriculars due to swimming? This is a really good question because I think for the parents listening in, a lot of our kids are doing sports and they are spending a lot of their free time doing that sport. And if they're not getting recruited, some families will question, was all that time worth it? So for this young woman, hey, I've got swimmers in my family. They're probably not going to be recruited swimmers, but it takes up an enormous amount of time. Like a lot of the sports these days, the student is doing the high school varsity team and the club team. So the hours do really add up, and it's a year-long commitment for a lot of student athletes. I'm not a big fan on dropping the high school team, but the club team is something to consider, because I know the club team it's so demanding. And so if it's going to open up a little bit of time during the summer for her to be able to do something that is, going to back up her major choice on her application, I am supportive of that, knowing what these swimmers are going through and other student athletes are going through. So I would not quit the high school team, because I think that's probably her opportunity to really shine. And going into senior year, she could be captain, she could, be all conference, she could win some awards on her team. So I would stick with that. Admissions officers will see, like if you're going to list the club team and it ends after junior year, they will notice that. But I think they would rather see that student continue on their high school varsity team more than anything else. Okay, next question. Hi, Andy. Hi, Sarah. My junior has completed 4 years of Spanish. Should she take a 5th year of Spanish to demonstrate rigor, or a 400 level molecular genetics class, which she really wants to take? They are the same level academically. So Andy, you ask, the question of the day every single day. I always get questions about foreign language. If she is in, let's say, Spanish 4 as a junior, she's done a lot of Spanish, and I'm happy about that. Do I want her to continue to take Spanish senior year? Yes, ideally I would. If she stopped, she'd probably be okay. She's not following my 5-4 plan, but she's getting really close, and that's really good. Just keep in mind that the molecular genetics biology class, it's kind of viewed as a science elective, even if it's considered a really highly respected class at the high school. So just keep that in mind, but it could be more evidence to back up a major choice, and sometimes students will do that. It's just tough because within a high school environment, that class can be looked at as maybe the most challenging class at the high school, but admissions officers still like those high-level AP classes in the end. So if she would be taking AP Spanish, that to me is probably an even better choice than taking that really high-level science elective class related to molecular biology or genetics. All right, next question. If I have a C in AP Calculus, but the teacher is willing to give me a recommendation letter, should I include that? I have 2 other core teachers, and counselor is going to be giving me strong letters of recommendation. So I do not recommend that you ask that AP Calculus teacher. Even if that teacher thinks the world of you, they're probably going to focus on the fact that you've struggled at times during the school year, or you've come in for extra help, or your grades are improving, or they did improve by the end of the year. As soon as an admissions officer sees any sign of a student not performing at the highest level, especially if a student is applying to the more selective colleges, that can be enough of a reason why they will not support and acceptance for that student. So I wouldn't draw attention to it, and I would focus on the teachers who are writing your letters of recommendation who have given you very strong grades from the start. Next question. Hello, Sarah. If my son works in the summers but does not earn salary but only tips, is it considered work or is it volunteer? I would say that's work. Yeah, paid work. Or it's called paid job on Common App. So when he starts filling out his application, if you're using Common App, and that's the most widely accepted application, for every activity he will list, he will have to categorize it or classify it. And volunteer, musical, instrumental, vocal, dance, all kinds of sports, internship, academic, they have all these categories, but one of them would be paid job. And I think he could mark that off. For some colleges, they will want to know that a student had a paid job at some point in high school, but for the most part, as long as you are keeping busy and you're giving back to some organization on a volunteer basis, you don't technically need a paid job, but I think it does show a lot of responsibility. And I would say if he's getting tips, that's probably a paid job. Next question. Hi, Sarah. My junior has been visiting colleges. He has done tours, information sessions, and 1 student of the day program. Should he be sending thank you notes and follow-up notes, emails after each one? Okay, so I'm going to be honest. As much as I love a handwritten note or a really heartwarming email, A thank you note is not even expected by the admissions officer who is giving your information session or the student tour guide who's giving your tour. But I think it is a nice touch. I just don't think it's going to make a difference in the admissions process. The one exception would be is if you are having an interview with an admissions officer at that college. I probably would write an email thank you note, or if you're getting interviewed by an alumni interviewer, I would also probably write a thank you note. A lot of times though, if you're one of 50 families who are listening into that information session, and if you send a thank you note to the admissions officer, they're not going to necessarily put two and two together. They aren't necessarily going to remember you. They may not be reading your application. And that thank you note might not ever even end up in your application file. So it's not that I don't want students to acknowledge the people that have helped them out on campus. I would just say that the more important time to write a thank you note is right after a college interview done by an admissions officer, someone in the admissions office, or an alumni interviewer. Question from Kristen. Beyond the letter of continued interest, what can a student do to continue to show interest in a school they are waitlisted at? So the letter of continued interest really is the best way to show demonstrated interest. There are a few colleges like Case Western where the student has to kind of check in every single week to reaffirm their interest in Case Western, but that's pretty unusual. I was just doing a reel tonight that hopefully I can post in the next couple of days about waitlisted students, because this is the time when the college does have room to admit students off the waitlist. They're going to start to do it right about now. And I would just say be ready, because there are a good number of colleges in this country that will pre-qualify a student before they offer them an acceptance from the wait list. So pre-qualification happens because the college does not want to just admit a student off the wait list. They want to have a pretty good sense that student will ultimately enroll. So an admissions officer a lot of times will do the pre-qualification. They will call the student out of the blue to gauge their interest or send them an email. So I would just be watching your email on a regular basis. You could get an email from an admissions officer. You could get a phone call really any day over the next couple of weeks. So be ready for that call. And I would say, even if you're unsure, you want to act really excited about the possibility of being admitted off the wait list, because again, they're trying to gauge your interest, and you want to sound like there's even if you need some time or needed to talk about it with your parents, you could say, I'm super excited. I would love to attend your university or college. I do want to talk to my parents about it, but you are my top choice, and I would love to enroll at your institution. You can use that kind of language, but almost always they will give you a chance to consider it and talk it over with your parents. Next question. What are your thoughts on research? A 6-week research program for my rising junior this summer. It is not a pay-to-play program. So if you're familiar with the videos that I do, or if you're in Application Nation, you know that I'm really cautious about families spending money on what I call pay-to-play programs. They're usually on college campuses, but sometimes they're even through an organization that offers research opportunities. I would really try to avoid those pay-to-play programs because they are, in some cases, very expensive. And if you're applying to a highly selected college, they aren't really going to help you. And in some cases, they could actually hurt your chances of admission. But if it is a fully funded program, and this is a student going into their junior year, and the student is interested in the sciences, I'm okay with the student doing that. 6 weeks is going to be a big chunk of the summer. And they can absolutely report that because it's a fully funded program. I would just say to any parents listening, I think it's so hard to keep our kids busy and active and engaged. And sometimes those summer programs are an easy way to keep them engaged. I would just encourage them as much as possible to use their community, to look at volunteer opportunities, or even look to something that they may be interested in doing something on their own, because sometimes those are the best ways to stand out in the admissions process. I have a whole chapter in my book, SOUNDBITE, called Homegrown Projects. And it basically encourages students to not feel like they have to go to some structured summer program on a college campus or do research through an organization. You know, you can do research on your own and it won't cost you a thing. Next question. Hi, Louisa. If your child excelled in a class that was relevant to his major and he had a very good relationship with the teacher, but it was likely that the teacher might say that the child started slowly and improved or surprised him by how he excelled, should we skip that teacher? Yeah, Louise, I think you know my mindset about these teachers. They mean well, and the letter could be extremely positive, but if the student needed time to acclimate, or there was a period of time where their grade was lower and then they worked very hard to improve. If that student's applying to highly selected colleges, the admissions officer, they literally, I mean, I can remember myself being taught and trained, circle, highlight when a teacher makes that kind of a comment. If the student is applying to a college with a higher acceptance rate, I don't see any problem with it though. Hi, Sarah. My son attends a private high school in the Bronx. I used to cover all the boroughs of New York City when I worked at Penn. My question is about the honors section of the Common App. Our high school doesn't. I don't see the rest of the question, Lisa, but I can almost figure out what you're going to ask. So hopefully this is what you're curious about. There are a lot of private high schools actually, and I know, you know, spending a lot of time in Philadelphia, a lot of the Quaker high schools around Philadelphia. In fact, they don't give out any honors to any academic honors to students, and there are a lot of public and private high schools that follow that philosophy as well. So what do you do? And students are always worried, you know, I don't have any honors to list in the honors section. I would say, let's hold off because you never know. Something could pop up that's outside of your high school that could be considered an academic honor. You know, we're talking about it right now. It's not even May, and something could happen between May and the time the student fills out the application. So you never know, something could pop up. But if not, you know, part of the job of a school counselor or a college counselor is to make sure that the admissions officers reading those applications from the high school really, hi Christina, I see you. Part of the job of the school counselor is to make sure that the admissions officers reading those applications from the high school understand that the high school just simply doesn't give out those honors. So it could be really helpful to mention that to the school counselor, especially if they are a new school counselor, but also the high school can list it on their school profile, make it very clear so that the admissions officers are not expecting that. But the thing is, you know, if you're filling out Common App, there's space for 5 honors. Most of the students that I work with in Application Nation, they are not filling that up completely, or they're trying to stretch it out a little bit. So it's okay. There are very few students, or a small percentage of students, that are really going to be filling that up with 5 different academic honors. Next question. Oh, Brooklyn, I love your name. I am a sophomore right now, and I was accepted to collegiate next year to be on a college campus for my junior and senior year and graduate high school with my associate's degree. I've heard some people mention that doing collegiate sometimes isn't as appealing to colleges as it seems, and if I stay at my high school, I would be in 5 to 7 AP classes my junior year, and take more my senior year. Which of the 2 options, collegiate or staying on campus to take APs, seems like it would appeal more to colleges? Brooklyn, this is such a thoughtful question. Thank you for asking it. And it's an important one too. So you probably go to a public high school. I'm guessing a lot of times the public high schools will have relationships with the community college or even the local university in your area, where the student could potentially take all or some of their classes junior and senior year at the community college or the local university, and the student could graduate with an associate's degree at the same time that they graduate from high school. I think that is a great plan if you're kind of mature and ready to be on a college campus, number 1. And number 2, you are interested and pretty sure that you're going to be attending a college, a state college within your home state. But if you are considering colleges out of your state, and highly selective colleges, I would recommend that you stay at your high school, your home high school, and take those AP classes, because as much as that can be appealing to do the associate's degree, number one, admissions officers at highly selected colleges are always going to prefer and prioritize AP classes. And number two, you will probably not get credit for any of those community college or local university college classes that you're taking that are going towards your high school degree as well, if you are looking at colleges out of state or, again, those highly selected colleges. So I vote the AP classes. I don't love AP classes. It's like, but we're stuck with them right now. And those admissions officers really do look to those AP classes as the gold standard, if that is the most challenging curriculum offered at the high school. The IB program is also highly respected, and some high schools even offer AP and IB classes. Next question. Thanks, Brooklyn. I love when students ask questions. If a student is good at both STEM and arts/music and would like to apply for a STEM major for college, does it make sense to emphasize exceptional capabilities in the field of art music in their college application? Absolutely. It shows the student's range. And sometimes there are students who get into top colleges that are very kind of very well lopsided, right? You know, they've got one academic focus and everything in their application is focused on that. But I think most students in general have a little bit more range than that. And so yes, it shows a different side. And that admissions officer could get a feel for this student isn't just going to be taking STEM classes, they're probably going to get involved with our arts community too. So I think it's a very good thing to highlight that as well. And that's the thing, I teach my Application Nation students that if you're indicating a major on your application, you want to have activities and classes and grades to back that major up, right? But that doesn't mean that if you're filling out Common App and you have the option to list 10 different activities, it doesn't mean that all 10 activities need to match up with that academic major. I think showing range can be really, really helpful. Christine asks, Purdue is test flexible, not test optional. If no test score is submitted, do you think they will believe the student couldn't take a test? Seems unlikely, but again, you can't unsee a very low test score, so seems better to withhold it. Christine, I'd have to look at the language that Purdue is using. Usually test flexible is very different than test optional. Now this is pre-pandemic, but test flexible used to mean that the student could, or the college could, use a combination of SAT scores, ACT scores, AP scores, and kind of create the perfect testing scenario for the student. That's really what test flexible was. So I'd have to read Purdue's policy to see if it's a little bit different. The thing is, you know, if Purdue is truly not a test optional college, they're probably expecting those scores. And they're going to be a lot tougher on a student who is applying without them. For a true test optional college, you know, the student truly does not have to submit test scores. That being said, if they're not submitting test scores, everything else that they are submitting is going to be held to an even higher standard. So you just want to make sure that everything else in your application is super, super strong and really supports, you know, who you are and giving you your best chance of getting admitted there. Hi, Kim. Another A in 2023 family. Awesome. My daughter was asking, when does a student look into setting up an interview at a college they plan to apply to? Summer, between junior and senior year? Great question, Kim. Thank you for joining us and asking a really important question. The interview process is going to vary depending on the types of colleges the student is interested in. So if the student is interested in those small liberal arts colleges like Hamilton and Bates and Haverford and other small liberal arts colleges like Davidson and Pomona and Claremont McKenna, a lot of times the small liberal arts colleges, not all of them, but a lot of them will offer interviews on campus or virtually with an admissions officer or an admissions staff member, sometimes even a college senior. And I would say the best time to do those interviews is going to be the summer between junior and senior year before the student applies. I think the fall of senior year is also a possibility as long as you can get that interview in before you submit your application. And the fall gets pretty busy. So having that interview done before you apply is really the ideal timing if you're applying to small liberal arts colleges. If you're applying to mid-sized universities or larger universities, some of them won't even offer interviews, but if they do, almost always, they will do it through their alumni network. So they will have alumni interviewers in almost every part of the country, even internationally. And that interview would take place after the student submits their application. So it's a different timeline depending on the types of colleges that you are applying to. But summer is a great time if the college offers them, but for those bigger universities that offer interviews, they are going to be offered to the student after the student submits their application almost always. And there are a couple of exceptions here or there, but for the most part, that's going to be the policies, or those will be the policies. Carrie asks, is it advisable for a Hispanic student to get one of her letters of recommendation from her Honors 4 Spanish teacher? Absolutely acceptable. Yeah, so all the foreign language teachers are going to be core academic teachers. So they are totally open to being asked for a letter of recommendation. My advice wouldn't change if the student was a student of color, a Hispanic student was self-identifying that way, or if they were identifying in another race. I think that's absolutely fine. Next question. As my freshman son takes his first AP exams, oh my gosh, he has a choice to send the scores to college for free. Should he do so this year? Should it be to safety net colleges or reach colleges? Rena, thank you for asking this question. This is an important one. Whenever a student registers for AP exams, the ACT, SAT, they will get prompted and they will be given a choice about getting free score reports sent to usually 4 colleges. Never say yes to that. Because if you say yes to that, that college that you've listed to get the free score report is going to get your scores the same time that you would get them. And a lot of times, students don't want to report all of their scores, especially freshmen. You know, it's unusual for a high school freshman to take an AP class and AP exams, and their AP scores may not be as high as a junior or senior taking the same AP exam. So wait to see what the scores are. And then when you are a high school senior, hopefully you're in Application Nation, and I can tell you individually which AP scores you should be reporting to the colleges on your list. And it's going to vary from student to student. It's going to depend on those AP scores and what the distribution of the scores is, and it's going to depend on the major choice of the student as well. So do not use those free score reports. As my grandmother used to say, don't trust anything that is free. Next question. Hi, Sarah, saw your reel regarding AP. You know my grandmother, that's what she would say, yes. Totally. Saw your reel regarding AP scores. So is it recommended that if you have a 3 in the major you are trying to major in, should you not submit? Will it hurt your chances? If you're applying to highly selected colleges, do not report that 3. Possibly not even report that 4. But again, I give individual advice in Application Nation. And I should mention, you know, Application Nation class of 2023, for all those high school juniors and families of juniors, it is heating up. And I'm really excited. I just announced my first round of one-on-one sessions with those students. They're going to be kicking off in the month of May, but all throughout the summer, I'm going to be offering one-on-one sessions to help students pick the right major, work on essay topics for their main essay. I can hear an essay topic and immediately tell you if it's gonna work or not. Also helping those students work on SOUNDBITE. So if you've been thinking about joining Application Nation class of 2023, this is the time to do it. All right, I think this has got to be our last question of the night. Is it a bad idea to declare a communication major on the application because it is popular? Would English literature or comparative literature be a better choice? That's a really great question. I'm going to be honest. So majors are really important when I'm working with a student. A lot of people will say, oh, you just list undecided. No, if you're applying to highly selected colleges, those admissions officers, they want to visualize you as an academic student at that institution. So you want to pick the right major that you have the most evidence to back up. But communication and English and literature and comparative literature, they're in many ways overlapping disciplines. The thing about listing English or creative writing, you've got to know going into it that every single essay you write, every single sentence on your application is going to be scrutinized. So you got to be ready to deliver on those essays. And for communication, it's a related field, and of course I'd want your essays to be very strong, but it's going to be a little bit different. So in the end, I was a rhetoric and communications major in college, but I did not list that on my applications when I applied. I think communication is a great field to list as a potential major, but most of the time when you get to college, you still have some wiggle room and a lot of flexibility to declare another major. So ultimately, it's my belief that students should be listing the major that they truly are the most passionate about and they have the most evidence to back up because they're the strong student in that area and they have activities to back it up. At that moment of when they apply, it doesn't mean they can't change their minds, but just be aware that if you list English or creative writing, boy, you got to deliver. Girl, you got to deliver on those essays, so just keep that in mind. Okay, on that note, it was great to see you all, and I will be back again for another Facebook Live in the month of May. I will also have an Instagram Live in the month of May for all those high school seniors who are finalizing their decisions. Sunday is a big day for all of you, and I wish you a lot of luck. And for all those younger students, I'm here for you. I'll be here right by your side virtually through the entire college admissions process. All right, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.